Right, go ahead.
Okay. If you have the labor and time to do it, it's like planting landscape trees. You want to have a larger volume of hole prepared than the root ball that's going in. When people plant trees on a huge acre by acre basis, they use tree planters and they don't care about that. They slice a hole, they stick a tree in and close it up. It works, so it can't be terrible, but if you have time, it's better to prepare the soil a bit more. Enhance the spread of the root ball out into the space if it's kind of tight and compacted. Shifting the tree around a bit or watering it as it's planted to settle soil under the roots. All basic stuff that would be important to any horticultural plant. Be sure that if you are going to go through the process of digging a large loose hole, to tamp the soil in very tightly around the base of the tree when you're finishing it up, because if it's too loose, the tree blows in the wind. Also, that soil dries out much quicker if it's not carefully placed back in there and secure around the tree. There is the graft union, which usually appears as some kind of swelling or joint, and it is nicely above the soil, ready to go. Trees are going to come with all kinds of tags on them, and some of them are made of pretty tough stuff. And if you don't remove them, they'll slowly girdle the tree as they grow. Depending on the kind of tree it is, apple, cherry, whatever, there's going to be a different first season management, whether it gets cut at a certain height at planting, whether you take the side branches off at planting or not, depending on what kind of condition it comes in. All that stuff is things you need to figure out variety by variety and what your eventual training system is going to be. So I didn't want to come here and just spout off a bunch of them. It's going to be unique to circumstance, so that's information you need to get that goes with the different selections you're working on. First year, they need to be kept from drought stress. 2 to 3 gallons per plant every 7 to 14 days, unless you're getting really adequate rainfall during that period. If you're getting a lot of rain, you don't want to do it, because like anything else, it can be overdone, and you can have issues with root rots early on. So remove those tags, prune to proper heights. Fertilization varies, but there's nothing wrong with doing this little blast to start things off. Some nurseries really feed their trees a tremendous amount, and they come well nourished, and others don't. If you get a tree with a pretty good diameter and a lot of branch structure already, which is more expensive, but those often have the advantage of having that woody tissue with stored nutrients in it. They can get off to a much faster start than a tree that's got to still build it up from the ground up and hit the ground without a lot of reserves. So it's why they're expensive to buy trees that are large diameter and branched, but they are very valuable and worth it in most cases. There's lots of different ways to stake trees as well. The key thing is to keep the rigid part of the stake material from actually rubbing the tree. So it's usually done with a stake a few inches away, a stout wire that goes around the tree with the old hose of some sort to guard the actual rub of tissue of the tree. That's the typical way. There's lots of other products available now, different kind of stretchy rubber materials and things that are very short-lived. They get through one season and they disintegrate on their own. It's perfect. And then you get to do it again if you need to, but they don't stay around there and keep injuring the tree or girdle the tree. Just cruising the horticultural suppliers' catalogs online, just fantastic amount of stuff you can look into and see. You might find something that really suits your fancy on these different procedures. In the first few years of growth, weeds are a tremendous issue. Maybe the most important pest management thing early on. You need to eliminate weed competition for moisture and nutrients in that tiny new plant's root zone. Roots are going to start moving laterally quickly. So even in the first year, even though you planted a root mass that's only like that big, you really need to provide it with a foot or more of clear space all the way around, down a row if it's in a row effect. So maintaining an 18 to 24 inches weed-free area is important. It doesn't matter too many things about how you maintain it, whether it's good old-fashioned hose, some spot treatments with herbicides, mulch, or even row cover or plastic weed barrier kinds of things. But do it, and at least do something to encourage the early growth of these things. Pruning is another one that varies depending on the type of plant it is, what kind of tree fruit, and what kind of small fruit. So I'm going to just hit some basics and then move along and talk about pruning again a little bit with each variety of things that we come to. But pruning is a very critical thing. And these days there are lots of ways to get help with it. There could be direct things like people coming out to help you out. But a lot of folks now in research around the country have posted really excellent videos of pruning and other online resources. Of course, it's always the challenge of taking something that's two-dimensional on your screen and making it happen in 3 dimensions. But at least there's plenty of material to look at and start learning from. And then occasionally, almost every year, there's some kind of little pruning demonstration or pruning schools offered through places like Michigan State University and others. And it's really worth going to one of those when you get a chance. There's going to be a pruning demonstration for ornamental trees and shrubs tomorrow in Traverse City. And even though I do it all the time and help people with it all the time, I'm going. I'm not an instructor, I'm going to learn just to make sure I pick up some new techniques or new differences for different plants. So. In the tree fruits, especially when they're young and very vigorous, they'll throw up what's referred to as a water sprout, which is a very, very lush green shoot from close in the trunks or close near the base. Those can be removed at any time. Summer is fine. But most of the real pruning is done when they're dormant. Young trees, you're pruning to develop the framework of how you want it to be, how tall you want it to start branching, where you want branches to be. If you remove too much from a young tree, you tremendously reduce its ability to put out photosynthetic material. If it doesn't have enough leaves, it'll have trouble establishing. So it's tender and simple, light pruning in the early stages, but that is the time when you're going to decide the height. If you receive a cherry tree and it's this tall with no branches on it, and you plant that thing next time when it breaks bud, the dominant buds are the top ones, and it's going to have branches all up here starting at 4 foot off the ground, and it'll be whippy in the wind and everything like that. So they are usually topped. So the buds, even the dormant buds that you don't see, are the ones that are going to break that are just below that cut. So these first cuts determine height, and then when buds break in many different directions, after you see what you got, you can go in and eliminate some of the shoots in order to position I'll get to that right here, to position the relative sites of where the branches occur. So they're not all on one side, they're not too close to each other. You also want to avoid places where they grow in such a sharp angle, because these kind of places are easy to split, whereas branches that move on a nice right angle or wide angles are the strongest branches in trees. All this goes on in those early years, trying to build the structure of a tree that's just kind of the way you want it. And that will vary depending on where it's at, because you might have a situation where you plant things and you want a really nice tight line of foliage, like grapes do. You can do that with tree fruits too if you really manage them properly. So it's the circumstances will determine some of that pruning activity. When they get older and they're in bearing condition, and then there's a process you go through, and it starts by removing disease and dead material. It's actually a pest management practice. You get out stuff that can harbor pathogens and insects and diseases. You remove the suckers and water sprouts that grow up in through the middle, generally where you don't want them. The unproductive wood means stuff that's too small a diameter or even too big in some cases. The grapes, the bigger the diameter of the canes, the less productive they are. It looks like they should be super healthy. Those aren't very good. We actually like the stuff that's pencil lead size, not lead, excuse me, but the pencil diameter. On big trees, there's going to be lots of branches, so you also have to deal with perhaps improving the penetration of sunlight and airflow by selective pruning. So all the pruning steps have a lot to do with tree structure when they're young, but a lot more to do with tree health when they're old and fruit quality when they're old. some basics of pruning that apply to almost all the crops. Avoid leaving stubs, nice clean cuts. Also, pruning equipment, have good stuff. Keep it sharp, things like that. Removing weak and slow-growing wood and trying to avoid anything that's crossover branches that are really close to each other or closely, that are shading each other terribly, things like that. I'm not going to get into the details of fertilizing fruit trees again because it's quite variable from one crop to another and even one site to another, depending on how much natural organic material they have in the soils and things like that. But what you typically have to add to the system is a little bit of nitrogen from time to time. And the amount varies as far as what is needed. It varies a lot, so it's not something you just look it up in the book and say so many pounds and you go with it. But nitrogen is the most widely applied or needed to be applied material in growing fruit crops. The age of the plant will make a difference, how much it needs. The crop potential makes a difference. The soil conditions make a difference. It's usually applied, or at least most simply applied in late fall, they say here after killing frost, but once you get into late fall. A lot of people also apply in the spring, or they split apply fall and spring. They don't do a mid-season to late summer application because of the cold hardiness issues. If you spur growth of green tissues late in the season, they don't mature and harden off and generate the sufficient cold hardiness to get the plant through winter. Those more succulent materials will usually die. So we like to have the plants have a good growing season in the spring, which is encouraged by fertilizing the fall before. But then there comes a time when they should stop producing excessive shoot growth. Fine to go ahead and produce apples or cherries for us or whatever it is, but we'd like to have them stop doing their shoot growth so that the shoots that have grown have time to mature. They have all the resources they need to mature. It's not being squandered on other growth later in the year, things like that. And you get the maximum cold hardiness then in the buds of those things. Most Michigan soils are fairly sufficient in phosphorus and calcium. Every once in a while you run into sites where you have to apply some of these. You can figure that out by soil tests before you get into the planting process. You get a general ballpark estimate of how this is in a site. And phosphorus, calcium typically are okay, but there'll be occasions where it isn't. We'll often see that there are deficiencies in potassium and magnesium in the soils. Those are usually dealt with an application at one point in time that may be sufficient for several years out, whereas the nitrogen is often an annual event in the application cycle. Yes?
Now this potassium and magnesium, where would you get that to put on these trees?
I didn't actually include anything in the talk on sources. When you buy stuff right off the old shelf at a garden center and things, it's usually got numbers on it like 12, 12, 12 or 10, 10, 10, things like that. First number, nitrogen, second number is phosphorus, third number is potassium, and those are the typical three that you get. If you need calcium, you usually end up having to do an application of gypsum or lime to get it, something like that. And sometimes a little bit harder to locate things like those, but better garden centers will be able to help you find stuff. And certainly agricultural suppliers will have it. But depending on the scale you're working at, you may not want to have to buy a huge quantity of something. When you get into the other elements like magnesium, sulfur, various things that occasionally come up as an essential element that needs to be applied, the better the center you're working with, the better the supplier you're working with, the more options you'll have. It's really hard to find stuff with magnesium in it that's just magnesium. It's usually blended into other mixtures, but it is possible. And that's something that varies from place to place. I can tell you where to get it in Traverse City, and I don't know if there's a spot around here, for instance, that would be the equivalent. You may have to actually order some stuff in through Garden Center or something.
Just a quick question there. On where you were talking about there, the magnesium, and it maybe would take too much, I was just curious, is Epsom salts a good source of magnesium, or is that, would it take too much? Is there too many other chemicals in with it, or?
Actually, Epsom salts is one of the classic easy way to get some magnesium and sulfur. But we often recommend it for small scale plantings because it's easy to get, it's easy to handle, and it works. So getting soil analysis, especially before planting and occasionally during the years of raising these plants, it doesn't have to be annual, gives you an excellent idea of what you need to work with in the soil for amendments, and usually it's best to do that up front before you get into planting. Or at least you can do it in just the rows that you're going to plant, so it doesn't have to be a broad scale application. For more detailed things, there's two ways to go about it. One would be foliar analysis. This is after you have growing plants. If there just seems to be issues that you don't understand, might be nutritional. It is possible to take samples of leaves. Certain times of the year is better than others. Have them essentially dry them and send them into the laboratory, or some gardens and ag centers can actually take care of it for you. And it'll come back with results saying exactly your proportions of different nutrients in foliage at the time of sampling and what you ought possibly need to change. It's not cheap, but it really works quite well. It's actually a very good thing. Every once in a while, even if you're doing really well, it might be interesting to have this done to get a baseline of where you're at in the system. There are other ways to do it. Especially with nitrogen, you can kind of ballpark it in after a number of years if you're very observant. Too much nitrogen, you get too much shoot growth, too much foliage growth, too granular growth, and often don't get enough flowering and fruiting. Too little nitrogen, you get very spindly, weak growth. You want to target a range that's giving you enough growth to bear flowers and develop the plant, but not so much that you're growing, 2 foot of new shoot a year. So you probably not want that. You want to grow about a foot of new shoot a year, it'd be very nice. If you're getting only that much new growth of shoots a year, you got problems. It may not just be nitrogen, but that's sort of the way it can be done. And if you look at a lot of the recommendations that come back from places like Michigan State University or any other commercial supplier, the nitrogen recommendations are typically ballpark estimates, and they're not based on first of all, they can't sample the nitrogen in the soil efficiently, so if you just do a soil test, the nitrogen recommendations come back are always just generated based on tables. This plant usually needs so much. And under certain circumstances, it's going to be more. Super sandy sites may have to apply more in small doses during the course of the year. On sites with great soil organic material and great retention of nutrients, you may not need to apply any very often. We have vineyards in the Traverse City area that have not had a nitrogen application on them in 5 years, and they look just fine and they're very productive. So it really is a little bit of, there's more art in nitrogen recommendations than science sometimes. Whereas we'd like to think this is all very detailed science, we just don't know all the answers. When you do tissue sampling, it's usually mature leaves that are fully expanded, somewhere in the middle of the growth. Where do you fertilize? I mentioned either fall or spring is typical. It just has to be under the old theoretical drip line. There's going to be roots beyond that as well, but it makes it convenient to figure it out just based on the usual drip line area. Circle around individual trees or down the line of drip rows, or down the line of drip areas on the rows of trees. That, believe me, is a course in nutrition jammed in 4 slides. I don't expect it to be a solution to anybody, but it makes you think about what you need to know. Any questions at this point before we kind of jump completely to another topic?
Yeah. Earlier on, you mentioned something of trees, and you were talking about molding.
Oh, yeah.
What were you referring to there? Usually they discourage molding.
Well, it depends on the planting sites. I've seen places where the soils were too moist for really healthy roots, and they actually mounded the whole thing, so the entire root system was in a berm.
Oh, so in other words, it's not a planted tree ground level and loading up the,
Yeah.
mounting the root system.
But if you're also planning on using a heavy load of mulch for weed control, you need to consider that graft union will get buried by mulch and it becomes soil there eventually.
That's why I was asking.
So you do still have to have it high enough off the ground that there are things that you might do even on flat ground that could lead to trouble at the point of that graft union. All right, pollination. Another topic that could be a whole evening session. But simply, you got to get pollen from the male to the female parts of the flower to grow everything. But well, you do have to do it for grapes too, but you don't need bugs to do it for grapes. So it's a huge part of the situation. We can have fantastic blooms of cherry in the Traverse City area and get very little fruit out of it because the darn things bloom so early in the year that you can get into periods of windy, cold weather and the bees just don't fly. Fantastic bloom, everything's going great, light crop. We can have a really ratty looking bloom and have some wonderful pollination weather. And the bees just go nuts and we have a decent crop. So it really, you live or die by this little step. You do everything right, you still have to get the pollen from one place to the other during a 2 or 3 day window when the flower is open and healthy in the spring. So, protect your pollinators. Careful timing and selection of insecticides, because pollinators are bees, mostly anyway, and they are insects, so they're susceptible to most of the things that you apply for other purposes. There are some insecticides that are completely safe for bees, so there are some choices that can go in there. And the timing, not just trying to not apply during active bee foraging periods or during the main part of bloom, but also even the time of day matters to some of the materials. If they have a chance to be applied and dry off before the foraging of the insect starts again in the morning. And then encouraging native pollinating insects. We all know there's enough trouble with honeybees. They're still out there. They have troubles. But there are thousands of native insects that pollinate plants. And many of them like the flowers of fruits, trees and small fruits. So being aware that they are your friends, you can actually do habitat protection and improvements for native bees. MSU has some nice bulletins and other material right now on that, so you can ask for that through the offices or on the internet. And there's a whole new initiative at campus right now on native bee management and ecology that we're just starting a whole new wave of education on it. So hopefully there'll be more and more information on that. Jump to the next topic. Integrated pest management. You got plants, you got the site, you got plants, you got everything else going on. You're going to, sooner or later something will arrive that's a pest. Now they used to tell you stuff like, oh, if you plant this, nothing will go wrong. Being with Extension 25 years now, I can name 5 or 6 crops that somebody came along and said, this works, no problems. We all know better at this point. None of them have ever panned out to be problem-free. So you need to deal with it, and the best way to do it is with some kind of integrated program that involves non-pesticidal controls along with pesticides and many aspects of making sure the system works right. The key tactics out of IPM, and find these wherever you go, and it bumps back to the early part of my talk, disease resistance or insect resistance as well, because there are some that have resistance to certain insects. Doing proper pruning and training of the plants, extremely important for pest management, not just for other purposes, because the healthier the plant, the better it's growing, the more tolerant it is of injury. Plus, if it's pruned and trained properly, the easier it is to do spray applications if you do need to spray to get materials in and out of the tree and efficiently. And the horticultural practices, all the various things that are involved in growing them are also important to the pest management. And then, of course, well-timed pesticides if necessary. So, fortunately, this second dose of this lesson, disease-resistant cultivars, sanitation, the stuff that drops to the ground, often drops there for a reason, and it may be diseased, it might have insects inside that caused it to drop. Even if it dropped perfectly healthy, there's stuff that will attack it sitting on the ground, so it's hard to do in a large-scale operation, but small-scale fruit, it's extremely important to do the best you can with sanitation, removing the diseased, dead, dying, extra materials out of the orchards and out of the plantings. Also, the pruning of things that are diseased. When you have disease issues in trees, some of the stuff can be pruned out relatively efficiently if you get at it early. The cankers and other fungal things that you can get on woody tissues can be pruned out. Those are things you're going to be looking for at that pruning point in time. It's the starting point of pruning, taking out disease and dead and other things. The good horticultural practices all contribute to the health and the maintenance of health. And then pesticide use in fruit management is primarily, especially in disease management, is a protective approach. The insects and such are a little bit easier to play catch-up ball against them. You can wait until things are happening and notice that things are happening, but we'll get to this again. Diseases don't work as well that way. It's really key to know your pests well, because different pests and different organisms suffer differently from the effects of these chemicals. Understand that you're going to have direct and indirect pests, and that term means that there are those that attack the fruit itself, right on the apple, right on the cherry, right on the grape, whatever. Those cause more harm per bug and much more important to you in the long run for the quality of the fruit and the income coming back off of a given season. And then there are indirect pests that primarily attack the foliage or the stems or the trunks or the roots. And they may not impact you a great deal in a given year, but they are much more important to the overall health of the plant, I think. So you got two different things going on at once. You're trying to maintain a real pretty piece of fruit each year, but you have to keep an eye on the other things too. Although you can usually tolerate a lot more of them or tolerate them for a longer time before there's major damage. Try to keep pesticide use to a minimum that will still achieve the results you're after if you're willing to use chemicals at all. A lot of people talk to me about whether or not organic production of fruits is a good idea or even possible. And I say that you are going to have a hard time. There are organically approved pesticide materials that technically can be used, but many of them are not nearly as effective as the synthetics or non-organic materials. But it's a choice thing. You choose that route because you want to market it that way, you want to play that particular aspect of food production, that's fine. Just recognize there's going to be some very different issues and challenges to grow things organically, and perhaps almost impossible for some varieties of things. When you're considering pesticide use, you need to consider the impact on beneficial organisms out there. So there are many, many different creatures that are going to be involved and impacted, either living in these sites or passing through the sites that you might use pesticides in. A lot of the pesticide applications, and even some of the other management things you do, are closely tied to the development of the plant, certain developmental stages, when a certain number of leaves are showing, when blossoms just start to appear, when fruit starts to set. And if you look at the management guides that are produced that tell you how to use pesticides properly and accurately in fruit management, you really need to be able to learn and recognize all those growing steps, the points of time in the history of the crop, to do a very good job of knowing what to expect, what to use, what management technique goes with different times of the year. And that plant stage is going to be sped up or slowed down by cooler or warmer weather. We all know it comes at a different time every year, things like that. So paying very close attention to the actual pace of the season and not just saying it's June, I should probably go take care of something is an important way to do it.
Duke?
You'll find that there are a lot